The NBA has become a league of sagas. Every offseason, there's at least one megastar demanding a trade or deciding where he wants to go in free agency. And every year, without fail, that process becomes an absolute soap opera. Right now, in the summer of 2022, we have no idea where Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving are going to end up, even though we just did this whole thing with them 3 years ago. But last year, it was Russell Westbrook going home to Los Angeles in a trade that I'm pretty sure the Lakers would take back if they had the chance. The year before that was 2020, so strictly speaking, there was exactly nothing happening in the summer. But when the offseason actually did happen, you had Chris Paul moving out of Oklahoma City and Russell Westbrook, who it seems like we just talked about, successfully requesting a trade away from the Rockets. 2019 was an absolute bonanza, with the whole KD and Kyrie to the Nets thing happening at the same time that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George were going to the Clippers, and Anthony Davis was getting traded to the Lakers. Goodness. 2018 had LeBron to the Lakers and Kawhi to the Raptors. 2017 was Kyrie to the Celtics, 2016 was Durant to the Warriors, and the list goes on and on and on. I have to tell you that I'm starting to get a little tired of all this. If it wasn't happening so frequently these days, I might feel differently. But it really is every offseason now, and sometimes on into the actual NBA calendar itself. It's fun and exciting to see where all these guys end up, a fact that the NBA marketing team and pretty much every media outlet are very aware of, but that fire hose of rumors and conjecture about what's going to happen can be exhausting, especially when about half the time, these moves never actually go anywhere. Like, yes, woohoo, Kyrie and KD went to the Nets and it was a super big deal, but what did that actually get them? Not even past the conference semis, and now it looks like the whole thing is about to get blown up. Kawhi and Paul George going to the Clippers was supposed to make them the next big thing in the West, but it definitely didn't. At this point, the drama of figuring out where certain players will end up is often way more entertaining than the team they'll actually play for, which begs the question, how did we get to this point? Deep down, I think we all know that the payoff is probably not going to be worth all this aggravation, so why do we keep doing this to ourselves? To answer that, we have to go back over a decade to arguably the most important offseason in NBA history, and to the teeming metropolis of Greenwich, Connecticut. In the summer of 2010, LeBron James was 25, and while he wasn't yet at the peak of his powers, as evidenced by his performance in the finals about a year later, he was certainly headed in that direction. Back-to-back MVPs in 2009 and 2010, along with 4 first-team All-NBAs and 2 of his 5 first-team All-Defensive selections, because people seem to forget about all those sometimes, meant that although he hadn't quite reached his prime yet, LeBron was almost certainly the best player in the NBA. The Cavs hadn't quite performed up to that level as a team to that point, but it's hard to say that that was LeBron's fault. And from both the decisions he made and his body language towards the end of the 2010 season, you could kind of tell that that was starting to weigh on him some. The Cavs were his hometown team, and he'd said in the past that he wanted to stay there until they won a championship. But all of that was about to get put to the test, because in the summer of 2010, for the first time in his already spectacular career, LeBron James was about to become a free agent. It's important to point out here that nothing LeBron did throughout that entire summer was by accident. Some of it was pretty ill-advised, but we'll get to that more in a minute. LeBron had structured the extension he signed back in 2006 in such a way that if he wanted it to be, the summer of 2010 could be the summer of LeBron. He had an option for another year in 2011, but when the time came, and the Cavs got bounced out of the playoffs in the second round by the Celtics, LeBron decided that he wanted to test the open market. And by open market, I mean the 6 teams that he personally chose to meet with. And by test, I mean they all literally flew across the country to make that happen. One of the Nets, Knicks, Bulls, Heat, Clippers, and Cavs were going to be LeBron's next team. And in an absolutely stacked free agent market, there was a chance that they'd be bringing another of the NBA's elite along with him. But there was no guarantee of literally anything until they got LeBron to sign on the dotted line. And before that could happen, they each had to make their pitch to him. While it probably wasn't exactly like I imagined, which is the teams basically hiring people to fan LeBron with palm fronds and feed him grapes while they spoke with him, these pitches weren't that far off from that. The Knicks, who'd already signed Amari Stoudemire that offseason, tried to sell LeBron on playing in Mike D'Antoni's offense, and reportedly got James Gandolfini and Edie Falco to record a message for him as their Sopranos characters. That seems like it would have made more sense for the Nets, who were actually in New Jersey at that point, but they got Jay-Z to do theirs instead, which I guess is cool too. The Clippers were really just there with the Los Angeles angle because number 1 overall pick Blake Griffin had just missed the entire season with a fractured patella, and the team hadn't even cracked 30 wins. But hey, Los Angeles! The Bulls had easily the best shot at a title between the teams courting LeBron. I mean, just looking at what could have been with this roster makes me a little sweaty. But that left the Heat, who sent Pat Riley and his fistful of rings to try and win LeBron over, and the Cavs, who were the comfortable hometown choice that could also offer LeBron the most money. Not an insignificant consideration in these kind of things. These meetings lasted hours in some cases, and went on over the span of a couple of days. But by the end of that weekend, LeBron still hadn't announced where he was going to play next. But after weeks and months of speculation, he was finally ready to tell the world what he was going to do. I think it's important here to disambiguate the decision, capital T, capital D, from the decision, because while they are obviously linked, they are two different things. The decision, capital T, capital D, was a 1-hour TV special on ESPN where LeBron would announce where he was going to sign, and in hindsight, it was a dumb idea from the very beginning. In the style of a broadcast like the Oscars or the Heisman Trophy presentation, the producers chose to wait until the very end of the way too long broadcast for LeBron to tell everyone his choice, because logically, they wanted people to stay tuned in the whole time. And from a ratings perspective, that worked. Nearly 10 million people watched the decision if you averaged out the whole runtime, and even more were watching when LeBron actually said where he was going. In 2022 terms, that puts it about on par with the first round in the NFL draft, which is kind of amazing for a pretty awkward interview inside of a Boys and Girls Club in Connecticut. And on that note, if you go back and watch the show itself, which of course I did for this episode because I'm a gosh darn professional, it's kind of miserable. ESPN and LeBron's reps threw everything together pretty quickly. You can kind of tell. Jim Gray doesn't really have a set list of questions. They're pretty obviously struggling to fill up the huge amount of time they've allotted for this thing, and LeBron looks super uncomfortable pretty much the whole time. The decision, capital T, capital D, was not great, and was honestly pretty hard to watch. But as for what LeBron actually chose, well, that's a different story entirely. Before the decision, capital T, capital D, had even aired, there were already reports circulating, particularly from ESPN's Chris Broussard, that LeBron was going to sign with the Heat. Long live the tradition of NBA reporters spoiling things on Twitter, am I right? Broussard had also reported the day before the decision that Chris Bosh, one of LeBron's friends and teammates with Team USA, had chosen to sign with the Heat, along with Dwayne Wade. There's been some speculation over the years that the three of them actually cooked this plan up at the Beijing Olympics in 2008, but there's not much proof of that actually happening. But in any case, at the end of that disastrous TV special, LeBron announced that he would be, quote, taking his talents to South Beach and joining the Heat, shocking many of the millions of people around the world watching him, including some of the people inside the Boys and Girls Club in Greenwich. And Jim Gray.
Miami Heat.
There was an equally ill-advised coda to the decision, capital T, capital D, the next day, when the Heat's new Big Three was presented to the Miami public like they were headliners at a rock concert. God, this is just a lot. This is the same event where LeBron said the thing about winning all of the championships. How many was it again, big guy?
Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7.
I'm not going to get overly upset about a 25-year-old sports star getting caught up in the moment, but if you're trying to set realistic expectations for yourself and your new team, that is simply not the way to do it. Also, I would kill to know what the pyrotechnics budget was for this thing. Surely, a press release would have been simpler. But once they actually started playing basketball together, all the pomp and circumstance that the Heatles brought on themselves seemed at least mostly warranted. In 4 seasons in Miami, the Heat's Big Three and the rest of the low-budget role players they brought in to fill out the roster won 4 straight Eastern Conference titles and 2 NBA championships. LeBron won 2 more MVPs in 2012 and 2013, vindicating at least some of the bananas courtship process that had brought him to South Beach in the first place. And then he went back to Cleveland in 2014 in an entirely different saga that's another story for another time. But I mention all of that, not only to go back over the story of the decision, which is pretty wild all on its own, but also to try and connect it to what's going on in the NBA today, because I don't think they're at all unrelated. While there certainly were big free agent sweepstakes and stars requesting trades before the decision, like Shaq forcing his way out of Los Angeles in 2004, coincidentally to the Miami Heat, LeBron pretty much single-handedly moved the goalposts on what we consider to be a normal free agency, and opened the door for a bunch of other stars to run the same exact playbook when their time came. When Kevin Durant's rookie max deal with the Thunder ran out in 2016, he had executives with all of the teams trying to sign him come to the Hamptons to make their presentation. It was the same situation with LaMarcus Aldridge in 2015, who, despite not quite being in the echelon of LeBron and KD, still had teams traveling across the country to come and talk to him. In 2022, it's more common than not for a star player to be able to determine the course of his own future rather than his team to do it for him, And in a lot of ways, you can connect the dots right back to LeBron's free agency in 2010 to understand how things work in the modern NBA, and even other leagues. I said at the beginning of this that I'm getting tired of all this NBA free agency stuff, which is true, but not because I don't think it's good for the NBA in general. It is. I'm a pretty staunch advocate for player empowerment, so even if it can give me a headache from time to time, I'd still prefer for guys to be able to play hard to get for months on end, if that's what they want to do, instead of having to wait for their general manager to decide it's okay to trade them or to not be able to talk to all the teams they want to hear from. I think it's great that they can do all that stuff, but I definitely do have questions over whether or not they should. Because if players have more power, that also means they have more capacity to do something dumb with it. I think it's great for Kawhi Leonard to be able to get a trade from the Spurs if he wants one, but what seems less great is royally pissing off one of the most successful franchises in the NBA, which you just won a title with, only to leave your next team, which you also just won a title with, so you could go 42-40 and miss the playoffs. I know that I just grossly oversimplified that whole deal, but my point in saying it is that while I think player empowerment is good and that the people who create the product should be the ones driving it, the hit rate on the decisions they make is not great sometimes. But with that being said, I could totally see a scenario where I'm completely wrong, and Kawhi Leonard might say he was super happy in LA and would make the same decision all over again. He's playing in his hometown, getting paid and making all-star teams. Doesn't seem like the worst gig in the world. NBA fans, and I'm very much including myself in this, tend to judge the success of a move by how much someone wins, but in a lot of cases, it's not about that, or at least not exclusively. The best mark over whether or not a big move was successful would be whether or not the player would go through with it again they had the chance. We still don't know what's going to happen with Kyrie or Kevin Durant in the summer of 2022, but in a few years, we can ask them if they were happy with what they chose to do. I mean, I'm not going to. I don't even know where I would start trying to contact Kevin Durant, but somebody will. But what we do know is that trade shenanigans and free agency power summits can work, precisely because they worked in the summer of 2010. LeBron would probably not choose to make the decision, capital T, capital D, again, because I think we can all agree that that was a bit of a tire fire, but the lowercase decision to join the Heat brought him his first 2 titles and some of the best seasons of his entire career. I don't want to indulge any revisionist history here. There were a lot of people who were very angry with LeBron when he chose to go to Miami, but weirdly, a lot of them changed their tune when he went back to Cleveland 4 years later. Funny how that works. Players can't always control how fans react to them, but these days, they have more control over the fans they choose to represent than ever. What they decide to do with it is up to them, and I'm sure ESPN and The Athletic will be reminding us about every single step in that process. But the next time you get that tweet notification from Woj about your favorite star, I encourage you to remember Greenwich, Connecticut. Because for all of his accolades and plaudits over his 20-plus year career, one of the greatest contributions LeBron ever made to the game of basketball was doing what he wanted. Hi everybody, it's Will, and I'm so excited about some of the episodes we've got coming out over the next few weeks. And this one too. Don't want to sell myself short on the thing you just watched, just because you just watched it. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a like and maybe even subscribe to the channel for more stuff like it. We tend to have pretty eclectic tastes around here, and rarely talk about the same sport in 2 straight weeks, but I prefer to think of it like we have something for everyone. The NBA offseason has been chugging along for weeks now, and we may have some more clarity on it by the time this video actually comes out, but I think there are at least a few more twists and turns left to come. That's all the time we have for you today, though. Till next time, I'm Will. See you soon.